Okay, so if you are brand new to Red, Wine, and Blue, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. We've had a lot of people joining lately, which is great. There's a lot going on in the world, so we have a lot of things for you to do. And one of them is to learn about sex ed. You're also in for a treat because one of our fan favorites here at Red, Wine, and Blue is Jess McIntosh, who is presenting tonight. So Jess brings 15 years of political campaign experience at the highest level and over a decade in media to provide strategic communications for organizations, candidates, and people who are out there just doing good in the world. She's a regular on-air expert appearing on both broadcast and cable news channels, and she actually has created and hosted critically acclaimed shows and podcasts, including the award-winning Sirius XM show Signal Boost, which she co-hosted with Zelina Maxwell for 5 years. Jess writes about politics and gender, and she's been in multiple national publications, including the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Elle, Refinery 29, and many more. And she's just an amazing help for us here at Red, Wine, and Blue. So we are really happy to bring up Jess. I'm going to spotlight you, Jess, and you should be able to unmute.
Thank you. I never feel better than I do when Julie Womack introduces me. It's just like, man, that sounds like a fun career. It was a lot more fun when I started 20 years ago than it is now, let me tell you. It's been 20 years now. My first political campaign was in the year 2004. I first got into politics because, I liked the West Wing. And so I kind of thought that was going to be the thing. And 20 years later, oh boy, is it a different thing than I thought it was going in. Which brings me to the work that I'm doing today on behalf of Advocates for Youth and Red, Wine, and Blue, and helping people talk about sex ed. Working in political campaigns, especially the 2016 Hillary Clinton for President campaign, really gave me a deep dive into disinformation, how it works, how it spreads, why you do it, and most importantly, how you combat it. So I didn't even think in 2016 that I would be bringing those skills to educators, to people like teachers and school nurses, superintendents, and most importantly, parents. The people who need to have these conversations are not just your politicians and your elected officials anymore. It's very much here. So I'm thrilled to be able to help in any way that I can. I'm pretty good at reading the chat while I'm talking, so throw questions in there. And I know that Julie is great at summarizing and making sure that we don't miss anything. So while I'm presenting, if you have a thought, please do put it in there. I want this to be applicable to your conversation. So if you don't hear a scenario that you would love to talk more about, please do let me know. We'll definitely have time for Q&A. And you'll also be hearing from two pretty incredible parent activists who are making major differences in their not so friendly territory even. So very excited to bring them on in a minute. But first, we're gonna go through some of these slides and we're gonna get ready to talk about sex ed. The most important thing to remember about sex ed is that it is not controversial. Sex ed is broadly popular. And the way, I mean, when we think about these fire starter issues, there's usually a split in the country, at least a 60-40 split. That is not the case for sex ed. And now these numbers after, these are the 2018 survey. So after several years of attacks are probably not as stratospheric as they are here. But the fact that we start at 89% of Americans believing that sex ed is very important in middle school and 98 in high school needs to ground us in the fact that we are on the side of the angels here. It should also make us feel better about talking about this in public. The vast majority of your community agrees with you. Even if you live in a red community, the vast majority of your community agrees with you that sex ed is important. They might not agree with you when they talk. They might think something about DEI. They might think that things are woke. They might have questions about gender, but they will agree with you that sex ed is something middle and high schoolers should have. So keep that in mind as you're starting to have these conversations. It's not. You're likely to find a good reception in bringing it up. So 92% of elementary school, and this is elementary school parents, thought that sex education should be taught in schools, including the following topics. This is important because a lot of people feel like sex ed is just the birds and the bees. And especially at that elementary school level, It's just not. You're learning foundational arguments that get built on later in your educational experience. But when we're talking K through 6, we're talking about friendships, building healthy relationships and avoiding bullying, different kinds of families and accurate names for your own body parts. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about elementary school sex ed. So that right there clears up a lot of the disinformation. Sexual health education keeps kids safe. These are the stats we all know. This is why sex ed is as broadly popular as it is. We all know lower STI rates. We all know fewer unplanned pregnancies, but better self-esteem, healthier relationships, and reduction in intimate partner violence are also things that we get when we have comprehensive sex ed available to kids. And that's not discussed as often as the first two. But parents really, I mean, everybody knows that the kids are having a mental health crisis. The pandemic was not good for any of them. Getting out of it is really tough. We all know that things are rough. Taking away one of the curriculum that is specifically designed to boost your self-esteem, to reduce bullying, and to make sure that you are safer mentally and physically would be the absolute wrong move at this moment. So let's talk specifically about that K through 6 set. What do they get? They get anti-bullying, they get child abuse prevention, and they get personal safety. So a lot of times when people have concerns about sex ed, that personal safety, that's what they're concerned about. They want to make sure that kids aren't being exposed to things that are dangerous for them. Luckily, sex ed doesn't do that. Sex ed, in fact, prevents child abuse. It's a lot more difficult to target a child who is comfortable talking to an adult, able to name their own body parts, and has a rough idea of what boundaries and consent are. Now, when you're talking about kindergarten, when you're talking about consent, you're learning to ask before you take somebody's crayon. You're learning to ask if you can hug someone. You're learning to ask whether someone wants a high five or a hug when they come in the classroom. You're not learning consent in the context of sex at all. You're learning consent in the context of basically being a good citizen and a good friend and setting your own boundaries. Obviously, as you get older, those concepts you can layer on until when you're in high school and you're discussing the concept of consent, you can do so in the context of sex, and it makes sense. But this is what the little kids are learning, and what it does is keep them safe, both from bullying within school and from, God forbid, adult predators. Successful message frames that work to talk about sex ed are these. People want to know that it's age appropriate. People want to know that it is inclusive, and they have some questions about that, so we'll get into that a little bit more later. They want to know that it's transparent. There's a sense with the disinformation campaign that they're trying to say that schools are doing something behind a parent's back. The schools are taking over a conversation that rightly should be had at home. The thing about sex ed curriculum is that it is the most transparent lesson plan you're going to see in school. In most cases, the whole thing is available online. Parents can opt out of the whole thing, any one particular lesson. They can opt out of a question within a lesson. It is one of the most transparent lessons that happen in school. Many times they're sending home worksheets. They're trying to get conversations started at home about family values and how that applies to what you're learning. So as you ask in your own school what kind of sex ed is being offered, look out for how they're determining it's age appropriate. I'm almost positive they're going to tell you that they know it's age appropriate because pediatricians and mental health professionals have signed off on that. And the good sex ed that we're talking about here, the 3Rs curriculum, the work that Advocates for Youth does, all of that is evidence-based and medically accurate. So that's going to be age appropriate. Kids will get that at the age that doctors know they need to start learning it. And ask about the transparency. How are you encouraging conversations at home? You'll get some really good answers. Sex ed educators are honestly they're some of the people that I enjoy working with the most because they think these things through, and you'll get some good answers to it. The child abuse prevention piece has an asterisk because we don't like to lead with it. And that is it's one of those things that simply shuts people down. When you talk about child abuse, even child abuse prevention, your audience tends to just want to withdraw. It's a little it's too difficult to contemplate. It doesn't wind up motivating people to do things. So even though sex ed does prevent child abuse, we tend not to lead with that because we want to bring as many people in as possible. And that's going to make it's going to make an uncomfortable conversation. So despite the fact that it's true, I'm sticking it there with the asterisks because I want you to start with it's inclusive, it's age appropriate, and it's transparent. I stuck it in there anyway because sometimes we hear this absolutely disgusting charge of grooming applied to sex ed teachers and other educators. If you are directly refuting this charge, then being able to confidently say that comprehensive sex ed actually reduces a child's likelihood of being targeted by an adult predator. That's a pretty powerful argument. And any adult who is saying that we should take away something that makes kids safer from adult predators is probably a little suspect. So it's okay to go ahead and say that out loud. Like everybody, like all of the studies, we all know that this is here. So if you're saying the other thing, we have to question your motives. But that's only if this conversation is happening. If this conversation isn't happening, you stick to age appropriate, transparent, and inclusive. And that's how you're going to win over people and get more people to stand up for sex ed. A little bit more about inclusivity, because this is one of the flashpoints, obviously. You're going to get some people who don't want an inclusive curriculum. Again, they are in the minority. And it is very, very easy to respond to these things. The response is twofold. And I'm happy to share these slides are available on the website. So don't feel like you need to write it down or commit it to memory or screenshot it real fast or anything. This response is twofold. The first one is every single school in America includes students who are LGBTQ. Everyone, every public school, every private school, every Catholic school. You might have a homeschool of one or two that doesn't, but every single place where kids congregate has queer kids in it. They deserve to have an education that reflects their own experiences. It's as simple as that. So that ought to be enough. But let's say that I'm the kind of parent who does not believe that my child is a member of the LGBTQ community, and therefore, and I don't care about the queer kids in my school who might get an education or not on my radar. The truth is, multiple studies have shown that learning in an environment that teaches that gay kids deserve respect, that creates a safer environment for all kinds of students. So even your heterosexual student is safer in a school that treats gay and trans kids with respect. They will be less subject to bullying and harassment than they would be in a school that did not do that. So you have the half of the answer that is about the kids most effective, and you have the half of the answer that is about all of the kids, regardless of how they identify. So take those two and feel good pushing back on this. An inclusive curriculum is a good and safe curriculum for everyone. So I'm stressing that it's not controversial because I worry that when we think about having these conversations, we think about debating, right? We think about changing people's minds. And that's not really what I want you to do here. I want you to talk to sympathetic parents. It's more important that you spend time letting people who likely agree with you know that there is a fight right here in their community. Or letting people who likely agree with you and have absolutely no idea that sex ed is under attack. Or there are those folks who, they've got Fox News on for part of the day. They're not really paying a ton of attention, but they've heard something that concerns them. They probably come from that place like you do, where they think sex ed should be available in high school, but they've heard the disinformation, and the disinformation works. So that's where you come in to talk about the age-appropriate, transparent, inclusive nature of this curriculum. But recognize that they've heard bad information. They will probably agree with you. That a curriculum that keeps kids safe and healthy is ultimately a good one. These stats make me feel a little bit better about where we are as a country. They come from the Wall Street Journal, which is not a progressive polling place at all. And you can see here that well over half of America does not want to discriminate against trans people. This middle one, 64% strongly believe that transgender people should be protected from discrimination. We had numbers like that when we got marriage equality about gay marriage. So if you're seeing 64 and thinking that feels low, it's really pretty good for movement on a civil rights issue like this. But more importantly, I'm almost positive that if we said transgender kids should be protected from bullying, that number would probably be more like 84%. Everybody hates bullies. It's one of the number one concerns of parents. And protecting kids from bullying is incredibly important. So take heart in these. The majority of us get it. But a minority of us do not, and so you may encounter a disinformation campaign. I have chosen this because it is a fun visual representation of what happened in Worcester, Massachusetts, when a school board candidate decided to base her entire candidacy around getting parents to opt out of what she called pornographic sex education. She very cleverly took the Pornhub logo, congratulations if you did not recognize that immediately, and slapped it on signs and put it up all over town. So if you were in Worcester, Massachusetts, you were confronted by the Pornhub logo telling you to opt out of sex education, and that sparked some conversations. The reason why I put this up is not just to tell you what a disinformation campaign might look like in your area, it's to tell you that we won. The people in Worcester, Massachusetts got together, Advocates for Youth convened a community coalition of faith leaders, former students, pediatricians, mental health professionals, educators, and they tackled it in with facts. They all got together. We figured out what they wanted to say about the curriculum. They figured out who was the right person to talk to different parts of the community. If you have a moral concern, talking to a faith leader is incredibly important. If you have a large immigrant community, talking to somebody from that community is probably going to be really validating. So getting the right people together, figuring out what they're going to say, and then flooding the zone with it. And what happened was that candidate, despite being very, very well funded, came in dead last. So it does work. This is something that we can successfully fight back again, and have. We fight back with facts. The first is to just remind people that the focus of sex ed is health and safety, right? It's not to teach kids what sex is. It's much broader than that. It is health and safety. And gatekeeping information from students can be really harmful. You may need to remind folks that the internet exists, and students are harmed by the terrible information that they get from their friends, that they get online. So the sex ed curriculum is making sure that students are safe. They are preventing from them from learning this stuff might be harmful to their health. So remind people that kids get bad intel. Bad intel is out there and the kids are looking for it, and that this helps keep them safe. This is about keeping students safe and healthy. So one thing, this is the one communications trick in all of this. This is what disinformation campaigns do so very, very well. They make you an engine of the disinformation simply by passing it on. I'm gonna remind you all of the campaign last year and what happened around Springfield and migrants and that absolutely disgusting disinformation, like the lie about pets. And of course, like everybody ran with that. Even if you were doing a, could you believe what he said? Like that's so horrible what they're saying. What that managed to do was lodge that narrative in the collective conscience, to the point where when you hear about that community, that's one of the first things that you think of. Now, that was spread not just by the people who were falsely saying it was true. It was spread by, I saw a lot of good progressive organizations putting it in the subject of their emails and sending it out, and it just got bigger and bigger. So when you are encountering disinformation, the first rule is do not repeat it. Do not repeat it. You can say that disgusting lie about Springfield without saying what it was. So many studies have shown that saying the disinformation out loud, like let's say the disinformation is pornographic sex ed here, right? Just like the campaign we were talking about. If I say no pornographic material is used in classes, classes are age appropriate, that is 100% factually accurate. However, it is counterproductive. What happens is that the brain will connect pornography to sex ed, even if the statement is saying, nope, the brain will file it into the same folder. We don't want that. We want them in completely separate folders. And the second, and this is the really insidious part, if we spend time talking about whether or not sex ed is pornographic, then I'm not talking about how transparent the curriculum is. I'm not talking about how it's inclusive and keeping kids safe from bullying. I'm not talking about the foundational lessons that kids learn at an age-appropriate age. I'm debating what the disinformation agents want me to say. They want us to talk about pornographic sex education as much as we possibly can. So when I'm confronted with that, I'm not going to repeat the charge. I'm going to use a line like we have at the bottom here. So if you come to me saying, I've heard sex ed is pornographic, I'm going to say students in middle school learn basic foundational knowledge. This is all the lessons are age appropriate, and it's a very transparent curriculum. Did you know in our school, you could even go on and opt out of any lesson that you want to? And I'm off to the races talking about the things that I want to be talking about. That doesn't mean that you ignore the disinformation. I'm not just not addressing it. If you need to say so, remind people that there's really bad information out there and you want to set the record straight. The truth is outside groups and some politicians are really invested in confusing and scaring parents to score political points. People get this. People of every partisan stripe understand this reality in the country. So reminding people that that is out there and that is why they are seeing some of this stuff is really important, and then pivot right back to the kids, because impact on youth is what matters the most. So reminding people that keeping good medically accurate information about their own bodies from kids, it makes them more vulnerable to bullying. And we think that their safety is more important than politics. Kids' safety is more important than politics is a line that has gotten me through lots of conversations about this. If I could give you all one to stick in your pocket for later, it's this one. Okay, having the conversation. Remember when we were talking about people who you think they disagree with you because they have heard something that is really alarming and they believe it. We need to correct the record with them. They have to know. But the way to do it is not to come back and say, "Ooh, that's wrong. Let me tell you what the right thing is." The way to do that is to find common ground. So figure out what what are they scared of? If I'm coming to you really worried about the pornographic material being used in the second grade, and of course that's not happening, what you're going to say is, I care too. I really want students to learn only medically accurate information and only in an age appropriate way. If someone's coming and saying, I'm really worried that the curriculum is trying to indoctrinate kids and it's gonna make them think all kinds of things and it's not gonna work at home, I'm gonna say, well, look, we all want kids to make healthy decisions. We all want kids to feel safe and respected at school. So I'm gonna meet your concern. Even if I don't agree with the facts that you're presenting at all, the first thing I'm gonna do, even if it's just, look, I share your concern about kids' safety. Obviously, kids are going through so much mental health wise. I absolutely share that concern. Then we're going to move on to the argument. Then we're going to say, that's why I support sex ed. So you're worried about something. I say, I care so much about that concern. I share that concern. And in fact, the reason why I support sex ed is because of this concern that you and I are both sharing. That is by far the most productive way to get this conversation off the ground and started. So this is your sign to go talk to your school board meetings. Show up early, sign up for a speaking slot, maybe go and check one out before you think you need to speak, and then own your 3 minutes at the mic. Our tips and tricks for that are state your relationship to the district. This is a little bit of a sneaky one because you're there because you have a relationship to the district. The opposition has likely bussed in a lot of people. So the difference between you standing up and saying, hi, I went to school here, or hi, I have kids who go to school here, or I pay taxes here, is going to immediately set you apart from a lot of these folks who will be from out of state. Explain why you personally support sex ed. Personal stories are absolutely the best way to make an emotional impact with somebody. And we all have a ridiculous sex ed story. Like everybody has like what they wish they had heard, how bad it was when they were a kid. Like tell your own story. Or do you have a kid who was really saved by sex ed? Do you have a kid who figured out their identity and felt good about themselves because of the lessons that they learned? And remember that sex ed has been proven to keep all kids safer, especially from bullying. If you can work in bullying, I would say extra credit. And lean on each other to practice. The first time that you do your 3 minutes shouldn't be when you're standing up at the podium. It should be when you and a couple of friends are sitting in a living room with a glass of wine, and it will be so much easier when you get up to the podium after that. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to turn this over so that we can hear from folks who have actually done it. So I'm going to kick it to Denise Powell in Nebraska first. How is it going, Denise?
It is going so great. We are thriving here in
Happy
Nebraska.
2025.
Happy 2025, everybody. Look at all these folks on a Thursday night doing this. This is amazing. Thank you. And thank you, Jess. You're just my idol. Hi everybody. I am Denise Powell, and yeah, I am in brisk and beautiful Omaha, Nebraska. And my story really starts with one of those awful sex ed stories that Jess was referring to. So a little bit about my background. I actually grew up in Florida, very similar to Nebraska. And my parents are immigrants. They come from places where we do not speak of sex and had very kind of old school views about sex and all of it. So the extent of my sex ed was really the first time I got my period, my mom brought me a bottle of perfume and told me I was a woman. And I was like, I am literally hemorrhaging and I don't know what to do with this perfume. Like, where do I put this to help? Like that was it. That was what I got, which was amazing. And I really, truly thought that when I became a mom, I was going to be so much cooler than my mom was. And if you look at me, my profile, if you looked at me, you would think that I was the kind of person that would be so much cooler and more informed and hipper. I don't think hipper is hip, but here we are. And so when my daughter was in elementary school, and I have two kids, when my daughter was in elementary school, and we would always sign up our school district, the Omaha Public School District. They'd always send home the information about what was going to be taught in the sex ed curriculum, and you could sign up. And the conversations were all these real easy ones about, to Jess's point, sharing your crayons and all that good stuff. When sixth grade rolled around, I kept looking at her, and I would have conversations with friends who were having conversations with their kids, but I was looking at my little baby girl and thinking, no, she's too little. I can't possibly have these kind of conversations with her now. Anyway, she went to school the day of the sixth grade sex ed curriculum. And she came home and she said to me, we need to talk. We have some things to talk about. And we had this really amazing conversation. And she was asking me these really thoughtful questions, but also questions that made me realize how much she had already been exposed to that she didn't fully understand. So, she asked questions like, I thought you couldn't get pregnant until you were 18. And can somebody force you to have sex? Those were like kind of eye-opening questions as a mom when you realize like they know enough to be dangerous, but they don't know enough to make smart, informed decisions yet. It really kind of made me realize the impact and the importance of comprehensive sex ed. And so I started advocating for it in some of our other settings. So in Nebraska, we have a state board of education, and then I'm part of the Omaha public school system, but there's a lot of other school systems. And this conversation comes up all the time. It comes up during elections. It comes up during the school year. It comes up in our state legislature. It's very, very sneaky. So a little bit about how I have approached it is, first of all, now is not the time to be quiet with your support. Our schools, our teachers are under attack about a lot of things. And a lot of school districts all over the country are having these really tough conversations around all kinds of evidence-based learning curriculum. And so your schools and your families and your kiddos really need champions who can help them make a case for this, science-based, comprehensive, medically accurate, comprehensive sex education. So they really need you to show up. And I see there are a lot of educators on here like, oh my God, thank you so much for doing what you do. It's so important. But non-educators need to now rally around you too and support you and lift this up. So there's a lot of ways you can engage, and Jess talked about a lot of them. Testifying at school board meetings, if you have, state legislature, your house, wherever these conversations are happening, show up when you can. They're always at totally impractical times. It's a pain in the booty. But sometimes they have options where you can watch online, so you can get a little bit of a little sense of comfort about how this procedure goes. So you're a little more informed when you actually show up. I always say go with a buddy. Even if your buddy doesn't want to testify, it's nice having somebody with you. Watch these meetings, learn the process, write out your remarks ahead of time. It's really easy to think that you know what you're going to say because you're so passionate about something, and then you get up there and your brain just goes blank. So write out some remarks, rehearse them, practice, time yourself, make sure you know what the timing is. I saw somebody in the chat suggest having like different versions of your speech. That's happened to me before, where I thought I had 5 minutes to speak. And when I got there, there were so many people there who wanted to testify that they'd cut it to 2 minutes. And I had to scramble to, slice and dice my speech to make it fit in the allotted time. If you can't show up in person, write to your school board members, write to your state senators. You can write just your school board member, or you can write the whole board if you want. Sometimes sending, the one school board member who is perhaps the most prickly, the most anti is a really good idea, but maybe CC the people who are supportive of the issue so that they have the ammo too, because what you want is for them to be able to say, I have heard from a lot of my constituents. I have heard from constituents, and that's not what they want. So always make sure that you identify what district you live in, make sure that they know your connection to the district, but also just get smart on the issue. Share fact-based information from reputable sources. Advocates for Youth is a great one. Here in Omaha, the Omaha Women's Fund does a lot of this work. And so I follow them. I follow their legislative updates. So I know when there are hearings about certain issues. They have a lot of great resources. There's an organization called Educate Us that has a lot of really great resources as well. But the big thing I would say is talk about it. Like, just like me, where I thought I was going to be cooler, sometimes people get weird about sex and sex ed and all the things. And so sometimes just shining light on the impact of comprehensive sex ed and on why you're so passionate about it gives people the space to do it too. So share things on social media, share things with your friends, invite friends to listen in, to come to the school board meeting, let people know that these conversations are happening. Being able to pay attention to politics is really a luxury. And that's something I'm kind of learning, because most people who are just trying to get through their day-to-day do not have time to pay attention to the things that are being debated at the school board. And so if you have that time and you have the ability to stay connected to what's happening, make sure that you're sharing that information with people who you think are also going to be impacted, and tell your story. Share your weird sex ed story about your mom giving you perfume. Because like Jess said, everyone has one and you can really relate. And, my daughter is now a freshman in high school, and it has just open doors to conversations and a relationship that I think is even stronger because we have had this, and because she has had the opportunity to learn things beyond her dumb old mom who can't figure out how to have a conversation, and come back and, we have this dialogue now, and it's been really great. So I would say another benefit of comprehensive sex ed is really the ability to strengthen the bond with your kids. And that's been probably the best part of all of this for me. We've been able to hold a really fantastic sex ed curriculum in the Omaha Public Schools that I think we're all really, really proud of. We were able to elect really great candidates to our boards who are passionate about this issue and who are willing to fight it out, even when the conversation gets dicey here in Nebraska. So when you do have elections, pay attention to who's running and how they feel on this issue, and make sure that you support the candidates whose values align with yours. I'm going to stop rambling. I'm going to turn it back to Jess, but thank you so much for letting me share my weird story.
Thank you, Denise. That was exactly that was the perfect illustration of what we are all carrying. I want to turn it now to Carrie Fight, who is taking it to them in Florida, an absolute like locus of the hotbed of everything. So hazard pay for Carrie. Thank you for doing what you're doing down there, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Going last, I had the option of sort of sitting back, and I know that Jess and Denise would fill you all with such knowledge and inspiration. So I'm just going to sort of like sprinkle on top of it with some things that maybe I can dive deeper into. But yeah, I wish we had hearing Denise talk about Nebraska. I wish that was the case in Florida. I wish we had as many good local things going on as it seems you all have over there. Unfortunately, we don't. We don't have those board members that are willing to fight anymore like we used to. But let me just start by saying my name is Carrie Fight, and I am a public school parent in Miami-Dade County. I also happen to be a lawyer, which does give me a little bit more access to things that are going on. Gives me a little bit some tools to address bad policy that's being passed, to actual have the familiarity with the laws that they supposedly are trying to uphold by passing the bad policy or meet by passing the bad policy, and also insight into bad policy that might be unconstitutional. However, being a parent is honestly and truly the most valuable voice that you can have in this struggle. And being a parent, and I have seen how my identity as a lawyer is far less valuable to legislators, to the media, than is my identity as a parent, a public school parent. So if y'all didn't already realize how powerful your voice is as a parent, that's who the media wants to hear from. That's who legislators want to hear from. That's who they want public comment from. There's a lot of activists and lawyers that are at the edge of the forefront of this fight, but most of them are not parents, and as parents, we get caught up in other things. So I think it's kind of rare to have that intersection of being in the fight and also actually being a parent. And so just really, really be empowered to speak out, because your voice is the voice that they're looking for. They're looking to hear from you. They're looking to hear about your concerns. And they're looking to hear those stories that Denise just told, and how you interact with your children, and how you pray that even though you try as hard as you can at home to educate your children, that you very much rely on the public school to fill in those gaps by experienced professionals that are trained to teach this information in age-appropriate ways. I agree with Denise 100%. I have a freshman in high school. I forgot that we had kids are the same age. And it has opened the door to so many conversations. I am in awe with the ease in which she asks me questions. And I go, okay, Carrie, you could do this. Of course, it's uncomfortable. But honestly, we don't have comprehensive sex ed in our schools. I really never experienced it, come up against it, and I pray for it all the time, because I hope what I'm telling her is good. I hope what I'm telling her is accurate, but I very much would appreciate the backup from our public schools. I think one of the things that Red, White, and Blue always likes me to mention, because it's very uplifting and gives hope, is that one of the reasons I'm here and I was connected to Red, White, and Blue is that a few years ago, we stopped some really bad policy in the school board. And we did that by joining a group of parents, and via both a petition and mobilization to several school board meetings, we actually were successful in reversing our school board's failure to adopt sex ed textbooks, which would have effectively removed sex ed curriculum 100% from that school year. And the reason I mentioned that, why that's so remarkable, is first of all, I'm in Florida, right? But also, we're really not, for years, we really haven't been too successful in stopping bad policy, whether it's around LGBTQ flags, marginalized children's protections. We speak because it's really important to give public comment, not just to change the opinions of the school board and to get them to vote yes, but just for the record, for the people that are listening, for our children, so that our children know we're here for them and we're going to fight for them. But really, it's very rare. I can't really remember another successful campaign. And this was such that the board had already made their decision and we got them to revisit and reverse it. And I think that's because what Jess has said, that it is such a widespread desire to have comprehensive sex education in our schools. And it's from folks from all walks of life. You know, I always mention, which we had 2 on our board that year, the single dad that doesn't not want to teach this stuff to his girls without some help, right? So throughout religions, throughout cultures, it is so widespread. We were in awe of the amount of support that we found in getting the school board to reverse their decision. Again, since then and before then, we're not able to find that support in any really other issue. And I think that while it seems like there's a growing number of parents or a growing number of people in general that are against comprehensive sex education, I think we know from what Jess is saying that it's just a small minority. They're just really, really loud right now. And they're backed by, honestly, a political movement that's just way bigger than each of our communities, right? So it's hard to tackle that because we go to these school board meetings and like Jess said, and Denise said, it's so important to let them, I live here, I'm a parent, I'm a constituent, and they fill the room with organizations, folks from all across the country. So it feels like we're in the minority, but we are absolutely not. We're absolutely in the majority. And it's important to remember that. Some school board tips, even though we lose a lot, we keep fighting. And again, there's such an importance of just building community. Even the act of reaching out to other parents and talking to them about this stuff, you're just building your base, you're building your network. If you have the capacity, I don't know the level of involvement of the parents that are on here. But you know, if you just hear about a school board meeting and you can jump in, that's great. But if you want to take a more proactive role, maybe there's some leaders on this call. You know, if you're familiar with your school board, if you're familiar with the website, if you have the capacity and the time to check the agenda items, to maybe you have a relationship with a school board member, which is great to build on the off season, right? So that when there are controversial issues, maybe that school board member lets you know what's going on. That's even better. But scour that website regularly, know when they post the agendas, and look for items that affect the things that you care about, such as sex education. I think in this particular moment, while it's a tough moment, because I think while we see that there's this sort of attempt to eliminate the infrastructure, you know, of democracy, right? All the ways in which there's a participation of the public and there's efforts to reduce that. We can also expect, I think, a lot more local ordinances and state laws that are going to be around oppressive policies that take away our freedoms and frankly harm our children, right? So to be on the lookout for that, that's a great step if you have the capacity to do that. And then like others have said, let folks know, let parents know what's going on, have the confidence to know that they probably also do agree with you that they want sex education in the schools. A step further you can go is you can have a pre-meeting. You can let folks know about the school board, ask them to come, but host a training, make it fun. Either Zoom or in your home, but let people know, you know, here's a lot of people are just intimidated. Here's how you sign up. Here's when you have to sign up by, here's where you can park. Here's where there's a coffee shop. You can just things to make them feel more comfortable. Here's what normally happens. And then strategize around the arguments that you're going to make, you know, the talking points. It's good when folks, if you have a group of people that are coming to a school board meeting, it's really powerful if you can sort of assign different points to different people so that everybody's not repeating the same thing. And, you know, even if you're not successful, like I said, there's so much power and value in just laying out the record, resisting. And again, you're building that base of folks that you can activate later every time that you do that. There's also, of course, our state legislatures. You definitely want to get involved. That's again, you have to have the capacity, the ability to go. I don't know, in Florida, our session begins in March this year. Y'all from different states, but to stay on top of bad laws and bad policies that are trying to sort of, that are empowered by the national politics and all the directives that are coming out of the White House. So if you can take a trip, if you can bring people with you, again, that public comment, especially really, it's important to lay that record. If you can meet with school board members or state legislators, and encourage them to ask certain questions, that's a wonderful thing for the record. It really helps later, even with some litigation when we're saying what was the legislative intent, or what did the supporters of this bill say. So it's really important just to get out there, make noise, ask questions, even in an environment like Florida, where you pretty much know, it's going to pass, that bad stuff's going to pass and good stuff's not going to pass. It's really, don't let that stop you. What else can I say? Oh, email, definitely, aside from, having trainings, going to school board meetings, it's definitely worth emailing your school board members before the meeting. Like Denise said, you could do one or all. You have to be careful if there's like Florida, we have sunshine laws, so you can't talk to just two, you have to talk to one or all. So you have to think about that. They love data. They love research-based data. So do state legislators. They get nervous about talking about anything. They like when it's really backed, and they want research and they want data. So as much research and data that you can provide to your elected officials on this issue, they appreciate it. This argument, I was recently tagged for an interview, because the last legislative session, we passed a law in Florida that says that not only shall sex education focus on abstinence, and of course it doesn't mention anything about contraception or anything, but the idea was that it was a law that said that abstinence should be a focus, and also the other piece that it said is that Florida Department of Education shall approve all sex education materials, right? And so I guess as empowered by that, a few months ago or a couple months ago, our governor reached out, it seems informally, by like phone call, his people obviously, and tried to pressure our school districts to not teach contraception and to teach abstinence only. And this was so bizarre to so many of us because we're the year that we live in. And it got to the news, and they looked for parents, and somehow they found me. And what I think they thought was interesting is what Denise was talking about. They were so interested into the conversations that I was having with my daughter around this. I think those are really important. They were interested to hear that, there's this idea that they're too young, they don't need it. And what I said, what they found interesting is that it's unrealistic and really very harmful to our children to not think that they're going to engage in the full breadth of human activity as they get older. And I compare it to, like, we teach financial literacy in school. They don't, kids don't need to run finances on their own, but they will need that when they get older. So when you break it down to some really basic ideas about, I want my child to know what consent is. I want them to know when they can say no. I want them to know about their bodies, whether it's a predatory relationship or a consensual relationship. I want them to know where they have power and what is not okay, and how they can have a healthy relationship and stuff like that. I mean, healthy relationship, consent. I mean, I think that it permeates with every parent, right? And so I think the last thing I'll say is in this time, because so much of the ways in which that we protest or speak up are being pushed back on, and especially in Florida, they've been as a lot of us nonprofits are really worried right now about funding. We've had anti-protest laws on the books for a couple of years now. We have a lot of ways in which we're being prevented from engaging in democracy. And so because of that, I think community, and I think somebody just maybe started with this, it's so important to just build community on a very ground level. Changing policy and preventing bad policy and getting good policy done, that's important. But also find your people, have those conversations, have gatherings. You will find people who care about sex education. I think we know that. And have them ready to go, have them activated when you hear of something that's going on. And I think that, like we proved in Miami-Dade County, that was like the one thing we were able to prevent in all our years of fighting, is we were able to keep sex education because it's such a widespread preferred subject in our school. And so that's it. I think that's all I have for you. Y'all said everything wonderful. I had very little to add.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And I mean, there's still 155 people on this webinar to talk about how to talk about sex ed. So yes, you will find your people. You in fact have already found them. You will find them in other spaces too. So thank you both for what you're doing for your kids and for other people's kids. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Well, I love that we have so many teachers in the room because they have been answering questions and being a great resource for the folks who are in the chat, but we're going to go over a couple of the questions anyway. First off, everybody was asking about the slides and they will be available. Julie will send them the link out in her follow-up email tomorrow. So are there any cities and or states that need support? Someone asked.
I mean, I would look to your state first, your city first. Figuring out what's going on in your school district, and you would be shocked at it is not red states. I mean, it is red states, but it's not just red states where this is happening. You know, I spend a lot of time in New Jersey and Massachusetts. So even if you think, well, I'm good, but I'd love to be helpful somewhere where it's not, I would spend a little time looking around at home first.
And then someone asked a question, and I think it was answered, but I know everybody doesn't see the things that are in the chat. Is sex ed not taught by general education teachers?
It's different in there is no one size fits all here. It's different in every district. It's often taught by a health teacher. In some cases, it's taught by, I believe, I'm going to lean on Nora Gelprin, who has been, if you've noticed in the chat, really excellently answering all of the questions that are slightly higher than my pay grade. She actually does the good work for a living, as opposed to just talking about people who do the good work for a living. So Nora, if there's more that folks should know about who teaches sex ed, if my usually it's health teachers is not enough, please do.
Yeah, no, happy to jump in. Thanks, Jess. I would just add that it really depends on the grade level. So as folks were sharing from their personal experiences, typically in elementary school, it's a school nurse, maybe a health PE teacher, and then generally middle school and high school, if you're lucky enough to have a health teacher, usually it's a PE teacher, as the old stereotype goes, and everybody needs help.
I got a PE teacher. It was not great.
I don't know what movie it is. I'm just thinking about the guy who was teaching and telling them they were going to die. And he was like the football coach.
Yep.
How is sex ed provided to homeschooled kids?
Yeah, well, it's not.
Assume.
Yeah. I think it really depends on the parent. There are some general health curricula, but most of them are very light in any of the topics we would want to see all kids get. So we've been trying to reach out more to homeschool parents, but it's been a struggle. Sometimes there can be a lot of faith communities connected with homeschool parents, which can make that a little bit higher of a threshold.
I think, and also I would just put that, like, that's one of the good reasons, especially since we have so many educators on the chat. Find a faith leader in your community who agrees with you. A lot of folks came to their faith because of their progressive values, and they are excellent messengers, especially on the inclusivity piece. So if you know of a rabbi or a minister in your area, pick up the phone, make a meeting, tell them who you are and who you care, what you care about, and see if maybe they wouldn't be willing to be on speed dial for you, because bringing those voices into the fold really helps counter the voices that the opposition has.
So then someone has an assignment coming of 10 weeks of teaching 7th graders. What's the best approach to teach what's most necessary?
Okay, so this one's way above my pay grade. I saw that Nora threw in, the development of curriculum for young minds is literally one of the most precious things that we can possibly do, which is why I don't even want to pretend that I know what I'm talking about here, which is really unusual for me. I'm very happy to pretend I know what I'm talking about. But I saw that Nora dropped in a link to the 3 R's curriculum, which is rights, respectability, responsibility. That's what Advocates for Youth uses. It's like the gold standard, evidence-based, pediatrician approved. You may have noticed that I've said pediatrician a lot tonight. I did that because pediatricians are one of the last trusted professions in America. When you say that pediatricians have approved something, people believe that that is that they are acting in good faith. They are acting in good faith, and people are more likely to accept it even than doctors or scientists. Or so that word pediatricians, it's like, if I could, like, the word pediatrician and the word bullying, just sprinkle those into your sex ed conversation, just to really land that point home. But yes, look up the 3 R's curriculum, and they will give you all of the best practices.
Someone asked for you to repeat what you said about faith leaders.
Faith leaders, if you have somebody in your community who is a faith leader who gets it on sex ed, or you think might get it on sex ed, talking to that person about how this is a fight that's happening and you want to help keep kids safe and you want to see whether or not they would be in your team doing that. Maybe you could put them on speed dial so that when you encountered, let's say, especially for the teachers here, if you're talking to a parent who has a moral or religious concern, it is so much easier and more valuable and more productive to them to talk to somebody who shares their language about, I can persuade lots of people on lots of things, but if you're coming to, like, I'm not a religious person. If you're coming to me with a religious concern, I have enough respect for your religious concern to not try to do it myself. But I would love to connect you with somebody who could talk to you that way. And so just having a faith leader willing to write a letter to the editor or stand up at a school board meeting or, sign their name to a petition, really helps combat how much of the opposition is just sort of draping themselves in the idea of faith. It takes that ground away from them a little bit, because that should not be ground that we're ceding. Obviously, we're talking about respect here. So that seems like a fairly...
So the last question that I had is, how are sex ed educators fighting the executive order from the 20th?
Oh, I think, and this is an important reminder, like we're all figuring out exactly what executive orders mean. Nora, jump in if there's already a strategy in place being implemented, but I would assume at this point, folks are just trying to parse what exactly that might mean for them. But Red, White, and Blue talks a lot about when they go low, we go local. This is exactly what that means. When we have been flooded since the 20th with just an inconceivable amount of information, directives, lots of it absolute nonsense, lots of it a distraction, lots of it absolutely devastating. And it's really hard to parse between the two. We are not going to do that. We are not going to spend the next 4 years doing that. When we're going to figure out what matters to our communities. So how does that EO affect our school districts? And that's what we're going to fight back on. But it's going to take a minute. Like, it's been 10 days, I'm assuming that every school district is figuring out exactly what it means for them. And then many of them are figuring out how to, and then there are places like Advocates for Youth that's figuring out how do we get information to kids, anyway. Like, how do we make sure that we keep kids safe and healthy, depending on what the new restrictions are.
And just remember that chaos is the point. So
Totally.
keep our sanity and not to get too caught up in that, and pressure your local electeds, whether it's your school board or your state legislature, not to to uphold, to protect our communities and not to buy into a lot of this nonsense, and demand that they say so, whether it's email or phone. We're doing that a lot on the immigration stuff. We're meeting with superintendent, we're meeting with school board members, and we're demanding that they say that they'll protect our kids.
Yeah. Thanks, Carrie.
All right, well, Julie, I'll kick it back to you because that's the last I had.
Okay, well, we're over time, so perfect place to end. So thank you so much to Jess. You had a lot of love in the chat for all the great information, and thank you to Denise and Carrie for coming and just sharing your personal story, your personal struggles, and the the things that have worked for you. I think it's so helpful for people to hear what people who are really in the fight are doing. Definitely hope to see you all next week. We've got great events coming up, and have a good rest of your evening.